You know what the terrifying thing about evil is? Most people imagine it looking obvious. A monster, a psychopath, a man screaming into a microphone with hatred in his eyes. But history's most horrifying discovery was realizing that evil often looks completely normal. A father, a husband, a co-worker, a man who loves animals, a man who kisses his daughter goodnight, then signs papers that kill thousands of strangers. After World War II ended, the world expected justice. Hitler was dead. Germany had collapsed. Entire cities had become graveyards, and among the ruins of Nazi Germany, there was one city that felt cursed: Nuremberg. Years earlier, Nuremberg had been the spiritual heart of Nazism, the city where Hitler held massive rallies, the city where crowds screamed his name, the city where the Nuremberg laws were announced, laws that officially defined racial purity and laid the foundation for the Holocaust itself. But now, the city was destroyed, bombed almost beyond recognition, thousands dead, families searching through rubble for bodies, and into this broken city arrived a strange military convoy. Inside it sat some of the most powerful Nazis still alive, the men who helped build Hitler's empire, the men responsible for the deaths of millions. And the world expected only one thing: execution. Simple, quick, public. But something strange happened instead. The Allies decided to put them on trial, which sounds normal today, but at the time, it was almost unbelievable. There was no real international law for this, no historical blueprint, no previous court where world leaders had been judged for crimes against humanity. And honestly, many people thought the trials were stupid. Why hold a courtroom for monsters? Why give Nazis microphones? Why risk turning them into martyrs? Even worse, the Allies themselves were terrified of being accused of hypocrisy, because while Germany committed genocide, the Allies had also killed civilians. Entire cities burned under bombing campaigns. And America had just dropped atomic bombs on Japan. If this trial became a moral discussion, where exactly did morality begin and end? But the Allies had a bigger fear. Millions of Germans still believed in Nazism. Millions still saw Nazi leaders as heroes. So the trials were not just about punishment. They were about theater, a public performance of guilt. The goal was to expose Nazism itself, to show the world that these men were not glorious warriors, but criminals. And among all the prisoners, one man terrified everyone the most: Hermann Göring. If Hitler was the face of Nazism, Göring was its charisma, its confidence, its surviving ego. And unlike Hitler, Göring was alive, which made him dangerous, very dangerous, because Göring was not some random fanatic. He was a decorated war hero from World War I, a legendary fighter pilot, a celebrity long before Hitler became famous. He had medals, charm, confidence, political instinct, and most importantly, he understood performance. Even after Germany collapsed, Göring still acted like royalty. He arrived with designer luggage, jewelry, luxury clothes, expensive ring. He treated prison like a temporary inconvenience, and that terrified the Allies, because they realized something horrifying. If anyone could turn the Nuremberg trials into a Nazi comeback story, it was him. The Americans assigned a military psychiatrist named Douglas Kelly to evaluate the prisoners. And this is where the story becomes strange, because Kelly expected monsters. That's what everyone expected. Surely men responsible for genocide must be psychologically different from normal humans. There had to be something wrong with them, a defect, a sickness, a special Nazi personality, something separating them from ordinary people, because the alternative was too horrifying. If Nazis were psychologically normal, then what did that say about humanity itself? Douglas Kelly became obsessed with this question, and ironically, Kelly himself was brilliant, high IQ, ambitious, charismatic. He loved psychology the way magicians love illusions. He wanted to uncover the hidden mechanism behind evil itself, like a scientist dissecting darkness. When Kelly first met Göring, he expected a psychopath. Instead, he met someone disturbingly human. Göring loved his wife deeply, adored his daughter, sent emotional letters constantly. He loved animals, protected pets, opposed animal cruelty. He cried during church hymns. And somehow, this same man had helped build one of history's deadliest regimes. Kelly became psychologically trapped because nothing made sense anymore. This wasn't the cartoon villain people imagined. This was a loving father who also signed death orders, a man capable of affection and mass destruction at the same time. And the deeper Kelly investigated the Nazis, the worse it became. One Nazi leader turned out to be less like an evil genius and more like an awkward racist bureaucrat. Another acted more like a terrified salesman than a mastermind. One brutal police commander cried in prison from fear. These weren't cinematic supervillains. They were ordinary people placed inside an extraordinary system. And slowly, Kelly reached a horrifying conclusion. Nazism was not created by monsters. It was created by normal humans inside the right conditions: ambition, fear, propaganda, careerism, obedience, ego, social pressure. That was enough. The Nazi leadership began looking less like a cult of demons and more like a corporation. Hitler as CEO, ideologues underneath him, executives managing operations, salesmen spreading propaganda, administrators handling logistics, and millions of ordinary workers simply doing their jobs. That realization shattered Kelly, because if evil required monsters, humanity was safe. But if evil only required systems, then nobody was truly safe. Not Germany, not America, not anyone. Meanwhile, Goering prepared for trial like an actor preparing for his final performance. He lost weight, recovered from addiction, regained confidence, and once the trials began, he became exactly what the Allies feared: magnetic, sharp, dangerously persuasive. Observers said Goering sometimes sounded less like a defendant and more like a politician giving campaign speeches. He wasn't trying to convince the judges. He was trying to speak to future generations, to history itself. Other Nazis even began following his lead inside prison. He became their unofficial leader again, and for a while it almost worked, until the prosecutors revealed footage from concentration camps, piles of corpses, mass graves, human skeletons stacked like objects, industrialized death. Even Goering visibly broke for a moment, not from guilt, but because he realized something. The war for public perception was over. No speech could survive those images. Eventually, Goering was sentenced to death by hanging, but even then, he refused to surrender control. Hours before execution, guards found him dead in his cell. Cyanide. He had smuggled poison into prison. One final escape, one final act of control, one final performance. And strangely, Douglas Kelly admired it. Not morally, psychologically, because Kelly understood Goering better than almost anyone alive. Too well, perhaps. The deeper Kelly studied the Nazis, the more he saw reflections of ordinary society. And eventually, he began warning Americans themselves. He publicly argued that America was not immune to fascism, that racism already existed, that propaganda already existed, that ordinary people could absolutely become complicit in evil. People hated hearing this, because humanity desperately wants distance from monsters. We want evil to feel alien. We want Nazis to feel non-human, because if they were human, then the line separating us from them becomes terrifyingly thin. Years later, another thinker named Hannah Arendt would describe this idea with a famous phrase: the banality of evil. The idea that history's greatest horrors are often committed, not by insane monsters, but by ordinary people who stop thinking critically. Ordinary workers, ordinary bureaucrats, ordinary followers, people obeying systems, people avoiding responsibility, people saying, "I was just following orders." And perhaps the most disturbing part of all this is what happened to Douglas Kelly himself. The man who spent years studying evil slowly began collapsing psychologically. Alcoholism, violence, emotional instability, pressure consumed him. And eventually, Kelly killed himself using cyanide, the exact same method Goering used. As if somewhere deep inside his mind, the line between observer and observed had started dissolving. Years later, psychologist Stanley Milgram performed one of history's most disturbing experiments. Ordinary people were instructed to deliver painful electric shocks to strangers. Most participants continued, even when they believed they were seriously harming someone. Why? Because authority told them to. The experiment confirmed something terrifying. Under certain systems, ordinary humans can become capable of almost anything, not because they are uniquely evil, but because human beings are frighteningly adaptable. Which brings us to the real horror of Nuremberg. The trials did not simply expose Nazis, they exposed humanity. They revealed that civilization itself is much thinner than we want to believe, that genocide does not require demons, only systems, fear, obedience, tribalism, and enough people willing to look away. That's why the story still matters today, because every generation believes it would never repeat history. Every society thinks it is morally superior. Every nation believes evil belongs to the past. And yet, history keeps returning. Different flags, different slogans, different victims, same mechanisms. The terrifying truth about Nuremberg is not that Nazis were monsters, it's that they were human beings, which means the question is no longer, how could they do it? The real question becomes, under the right circumstances, would we?